But there were two possibilities. Either Flight 52 had a radio transmission issue, causing it to hear calls but not transmit their responses, or both pilots had been taken hostage. Considering the first possibility, Athens Control Tower gave the plane permission to descend. However, there was no signal from Flight 52 to descend. Despite contacting more than 20 times, when there was no response, Athens ATC was forced to contact the Greek Air Force and inform them that Flight 52 had entered airspace without permission and that messages were not being returned. The Greek Air Force immediately dispatched two F-16 jets to intercept. Until then, Flight 52 had been perfectly following its flight path on autopilot. The landing point had already been missed twice, but the plane was still flying at 34,000 feet. At 11 a.m., Flight 52 entered a holding pattern over Athens Airport. A holding pattern refers to a pattern in which the plane circles the airport and, upon receiving permission, begins a landing approach. While they were on their sixth round, they were intercepted by two F-16s. It was exactly 8:30 a.m. One of the two F-16 pilots reported a surprising incident. He said the captain's seat in Flight 52's cockpit was empty. He also looked inside the passenger cabin. Through the light from the side windows, he could clearly see the cabin. The passengers were sitting motionless in their seats, even though they had oxygen masks on their faces. As the plane was making its 10th round of the holding pattern, one of the F-16 pilots noticed a strange sight. A man wearing a light blue shirt and a black vest entered the cockpit and sat in the captain's seat. He wore headphones and placed his hands on the panel in front of him. The pilot signaled to the man in the cockpit, to which he responded with a wave. However, moments later, the plane's left engine failed. The plane then banked sharply to the left and began descending. Shortly before 9 a.m., the plane made a further left turn, and then its right engine also failed. Approximately 4 minutes later, it crashed into the hills northwest of Athens and was destroyed. Investigators immediately got to work on the accident. They inspected the wreckage and questioned the engineer who had performed maintenance on the plane before the accident. The night before the accident, the same engineer had performed a pressurization leak test on the plane. During this test, he had switched the pressurization mode on the overhead panel from automatic to manual. However, after completing the test, he forgot to put the switch back on automatic. The plane was flying at an altitude of 34,000 feet, and the manual setting caused the air pressure inside to decrease. The human brain can only function for 10 minutes at low pressure, and this condition is called hypoxia, meaning lack of oxygen. This primarily affects the brain, leading to confusion, impaired thinking, and ultimately unconsciousness or death. Both pilots were supposed to check this switch as part of their pre-flight duties, but they failed to notice. Because normally, that switch is in the auto position, they had 2 more chances to identify the problem, before taxiing and after takeoff. But they missed each opportunity. When the plane reached over 12,000 feet, the cabin altitude warning alarm began sounding. However, the pilot's attention went to the takeoff configuration warning instead of the pressurization system. In this confusion, they initiated the procedure normally performed on the runway before takeoff, completely ignoring the real problem. Meanwhile, the oxygen masks were released and the oxygen light nearby came on. However, due to the initial effects of hypoxia, they probably ignored this. This is when the captain and first officer fell unconscious, and after the oxygen supply ran out in 10 minutes, the passengers and crew also lost consciousness. The question now arises as to who was the person in the cockpit who arrived 2 hours after they fell unconscious. The investigation revealed that it was flight attendant Andreas Programu, who held a commercial pilot's license but was not qualified to fly a 737. The cockpit voice recorder revealed that Programu attempted to make a MED call after the engines failed, but accidentally forgot to press the transmit button. The investigation board determined that his flying expertise was insufficient to control a Boeing 737, especially when the engines had failed due to fuel exhaustion. And even if he had somehow landed the plane, it would have been impossible for the passengers and crew to survive, because prolonged hypoxia causes irreversible brain damage. During the investigation, 3 of the 4 portable oxygen cylinders were found in the wreckage in used condition. This proved that the proxies, and possibly 2 other cabin crew members, had used these cylinders, which may have allowed them to remain conscious longer than the other passengers and pilots. Following the Helios Flight 52 disaster, the aviation industry learned a great deal, and several new SOPs were created, including requiring Boeing to enhance pilot training, and instructions were given to distinguish between warnings. After implementing these SOPs, an accident like Helios Flight 52 has never happened again. See you in the next great video.